It's Arizona in 1886. The United States has all but tamed the Wild West, but one Native American rebel stubbornly refuses to surrender. Geronimo, the last insurgent, rides across the desert with his wily band of renegades. Some 5,000 U.S. soldiers have been dispatched to apprehend him, but still he evades capture. Few people know his life story, but according to his followers, he is an extraordinary man with supernatural gifts. How Native American leader Geronimo defied death. The Apaches were a people defined by their ferocious resistance to Mexican colonists and, after the westward expansion of the U.S. border, American settlers too. Geronimo was the most famous and ruthless of Apache warriors, the last in a long line of spirited freedom fighters. He was also a medicine man, a malcontent and a fearless leader of outlaws. Indeed, few things were as important to an Apache as freedom, especially freedom from laws, governments and hierarchies. Apache society had no central leadership, no class system and no overarching political structure. Every Apache was free to go wherever he chose and to follow whoever he wished. Wild and free, they were a people characterized by rugged individuality. Of course, the Apache heartlands were themselves as untamed as their indigenous inhabitants. Spanning northern Mexico and the southwest United States, the patchwork of lands collectively known as Apacheria included rambling mountain ranges, lush valleys, evergreen forests, plains, vertiginous canyons and mile upon mile of flat, scorching, wide-open desert. However, the ancestral homeland of the Apaches was most likely in the far north of the continent. Indigenous peoples in Canada and Alaska, for example, speak forms of Athabascan, the same linguistic family as Apache languages. As such, the Apaches are thought to have migrated to the southwest between 500 and 800 years ago and settled into several distinct but related tribes. However, the basic unit of Apache society was not the tribe but the band. The Apache band was a fluid structure that could form, reform or disperse at will. It was, in fact, the ideal type of organization for guerrilla warfare. The changeability of the band, its loose structure and roving mobility, lent the Apaches a distinct advantage over their enemies, especially when those opponents were hampered by slow-moving bureaucracy, such as the Spanish Empire. For centuries, Apacheria marked the northern borderlands of the Hispanic New World. And after Mexico gained independence in 1821, it marked the outer limits of two fledgling nations, the US and Mexico. It was a lawless, volatile, far-flung place that defied easy colonization. White settlements were common targets for Apache raids. And elsewhere, Apaches clashed with neighboring Navajo and Comanche groups, their sworn enemies. A son of the Chiricahua tribe, Geronimo was born in Nodoyan Canyon on the Gila River in Mexico in June 1829. His original name was Goyakla, meaning yawner. However, Geronimo soon proved anything but sleepy. During his first hunt as a boy, he ate the raw heart of his prey. And according to Apache tradition, this act guaranteed his future success as a killer. By the time he was 17, Goyakla had led 4 raids, fulfilling the necessary requirements to become an Apache warrior. It is said that he earned the moniker Geronimo during one such raid. According to some historians, a Mexican soldier may have unwittingly provided the new name while screaming out for the divine assistance of Saint Jerome or San Geronimo. Raiding was a way of life for the Apache, but not all incursions were violent. Sometimes a foray could involve quietly rustling a few cows. Other times, assaults were undertaken as acts of revenge. Such raids could be brutal and merciless. At worst, they culminated in the wholesale slaughter of entire settlements or military outposts. Nonetheless, Apacheria was not always steeped in blood. Episodes of peace punctuated periods of war, particularly during the last days of the Spanish Empire. The young Mexican Republic was less successful at placating the Apaches, however, as the struggle for independence had left the country fractured and volatile. Ultimately, Mexico did not have the economic or military resources to control its northern frontier. As Apacheria descended into chaos, the government in Chihuahua City resolved to hire mercenaries, gangs of immigrant Anglo-Americans among them, to quell the troublesome Apaches. The government paid a fee for each dead Apache, contingent on the presentation of his or her severed scalp. Naturally, the cycle of revenge intensified. and attacks by both sides became increasingly barbaric. In 1846, however, the Mexico-Apache War was interrupted by seismic geopolitical shifts. To the east, Anglo-American lawmakers were gripped by a momentous political fever. On the one hand, manifest destiny beckoned the U.S. to expand westward over the continent. On the other, the idea of American exceptionalism fomented discourses of cultural and racial supremacy. On April 25, Mexican troops attacked a U.S. military contingent occupying a disputed zone on the southern border of Texas, itself a former territory of Mexico. In response, the U.S. declared war on Mexico on May 13. The two sides were poorly matched, and the U.S. easily prevailed over its ill-prepared and politically unstable neighbor. The war concluded with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. The terms included a radical redrawing of international boundaries. In effect, Mexico relinquished nearly half of its national territory. The U.S. gained the entire Southwest, including vast swathes of Apacheria. 6 years later, the U.S. acquired even more Mexican land with the so-called Gadsden Purchase. Of course, the region's social dynamics were completely transformed by the westward expansion of the United States. With a new international border now running through its heart, Apacheria was effectively destroyed. Anglo-American settlers started pouring in, closely followed by gold prospectors. In response, the Apaches intensified their raids and ambushed westbound wagon trains. War with the Americans raged for 10 years, but in the end, Chief Cochise, who was Geronimo's father-in-law, sensed the futility of resistance. He brokered for peace and negotiated a reservation on traditional Apache lands. However, shortly after Cochise died, the U.S. government tore up their agreement and relocated the Chiricahuas to San Carlos Reservation in Arizona. Naturally, Geronimo refused to accept such a bitter humiliation. He escaped from the reservation, ran wild across the countryside and terrorized settlers. But the U.S. Army invariably caught up with him and, after years of cat-and-mouse drama, returned him to his appointed place at San Carlos Reservation. Of course, that was hardly the end of it. Geronimo made his third and final escape from the reservation on May 17, 1885. Accompanied by 135 faithful followers, he rode up to 70 miles per day to evade capture by the U.S. cavalry and the turncoat Apache scouts who served them. For Geronimo was not merely driven by a love of freedom, but also by an insatiable lust for revenge. Back in 1851 he had left his camp to conduct some trade in the settlement of Casas Grandes. When he returned, he found his wife elope and their 3 children dead. They had been murdered in a Mexican military strike conducted by Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco. Geronimo subsequently described the moment when he found them. He said, "I stood until all had passed, hardly knowing what I would do. I had no weapon, nor did I hardly wish to fight, neither did I contemplate recovering the bodies of my loved ones, for that was forbidden. I did not pray, nor did I resolve to do anything in particular, for I had no purpose left. I was never again contented in our quiet home." Apache custom requires that the possessions of dead people are burned, lest their ghosts linger in the world of the living. Geronimo torched his family's belongings, then took off into the wilderness to grieve. It was there, at his darkest moment, that the Apache fighter apparently experienced an unearthly epiphany. According to popular legend, he heard a voice which he identified as a spiritual protector. The voice said that special powers had been bestowed upon him, including the power of invulnerability. It said, "No gun will ever kill you. I will take the bullets from the guns of the Mexicans, and I will guide your arrows." Spiritual power played an important role in Apache culture. The Apaches believed that a host of abilities could be bestowed upon individuals or entire tribes for the purposes of healing, protection or success in hunting and warfare. Geronimo was believed to possess the supernatural capacity to see faraway events, create storms and heal the sick, as well as dodge bullets. Naturally, Geronimo and his followers derived great courage from the belief that no gun could ever kill him. In his first act of revenge, he gathered a band of 200 men and slaughtered his family's killers. He then embarked on an unprecedented murder spree. Over the years, he was shot and wounded several times, but his special powers never let him down. No gun ever did kill him. Of course, Geronimo's rampage across the Wild West earned him a fearsome reputation. The newspapers covered his antics closely, elevating his notoriety to a national level. As such, he was a persistent source of embarrassment to the federal authorities. As a son of the land, he knew the region's complicated terrain inside out. He was near impossible to catch. Nonetheless, after a 5-month pursuit involving 5,000 U.S. soldiers and 3,000 miles of rugged terrain, General Nelson Miles trapped Geronimo in Skeleton Canyon, Arizona, and forced him to surrender his Winchester rifle for the last time. Miraculously, Geronimo and his band avoided being hanged. Instead, they were sent into exile. Bundled into a heavily armored boxcar, Geronimo and his followers were transported hundreds of miles to Fort Pickens in Pensacola, Florida. Their sentence included hard labor, but the Apaches were ill-suited to the Floridian climate. According to the Washington Post newspaper, they died like flies at frost time. Furthermore, Geronimo was forced to suffer the indignity of serving as a tourist attraction. Hundreds came to gawk at him in his prison cell. Meanwhile, the children of Geronimo's followers were rounded up and dispatched to Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania for re-education. At the time, racial discourses suggested that Native American children could be decultured and thus delivered from a state of savagery to civilization. Sadly, however, a significant proportion of the school's pupils died in a tuberculosis outbreak. After a stint in Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama, Geronimo and his 300 followers were then confined to the Comanche and Kiowa Reservation near Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 1894. He remained there for more than 14 years, although he was permitted to travel outside on special occasions, such as 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Among the fair exhibits was a reconstructed Apache village with Geronimo as its centerpiece. The exhibit was an opportunity for Americans to witness cultural activities performed by women from the pueblos, including pottery production and corn grinding. They could also pose for photos with Geronimo and request his autograph. Geronimo did not seem to be particularly offended by his role as a living museum. In fact, he seemed to be fascinated by many of the fair's exhibits, including a magic show where a woman was stabbed with multiple swords and did not die. Smithsonian Magazine quoted him as saying to a writer, "I would like to know how she was so quickly healed and why the wounds did not kill her." Furthermore, Geronimo's experiences at the fair apparently caused him to revise his opinion of white people. According to his dictated memoirs, he now considered them a kind and peaceful people. He said, "During all the time I was at the fair, no one tried to harm me in any way. Had this been among the Mexicans, I am sure I should have been compelled to defend myself often." Following the fair, Geronimo took a job with Pawnee Bill's Wild West show. Under the supervision of federal guards, he played the role of a savage chief who had slaughtered countless innocent civilians. He was, according to the lineup, the worst Indian that ever lived. Of course, the show would be considered politically incorrect by today's standards, but Geronimo was happy to participate. It earned him good money. Geronimo's most high-profile public engagement was the presidential inauguration of Theodore Roosevelt in March 1905. Along with 5 Native American chiefs clad in headdresses and face paint, he participated in a horse parade on Pennsylvania Avenue. According to one journalist at the time, the event was staged to demonstrate that the U.S. and Native America had buried the hatchet forever. Geronimo subsequently met Roosevelt in person. According to the New York Tribune newspaper's uncharitable account of the event, Geronimo made a pathetic appeal to return to the Southwest, tears running down his bullet-scarred cheeks. However, the old rebel was not well received. Roosevelt reportedly told him, "You killed many of my people, you burned villages, you were not good Indians." According to the New York Tribune, Geronimo reacted by gesturing wildly. A staff member intervened and told him, "The Great Father is very busy." He was then escorted from the room. Predictably, Geronimo was never allowed to return to Arizona. Of course, he had so many enemies there, he may have been murdered if he had ever gone back. In February 1909, Geronimo was riding towards his house when his horse threw him. Unable to get up, he spent the night on the cold ground. The next day, a friend rescued him, but he was sick and frail. 6 days later he died. "I should never have surrendered," he said before he passed away. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." Although Geronimo was widely feared in his day, some applauded him as a wily freedom fighter, a rebel, a hero and a protector of Native American ways. That said, others viewed him as a stubborn old fool, an abuser, a drunk, a gambler and a murderer. But modern historical analyses rarely pigeonhole him as either a hero or a villain, but rather as a complex figure who did both good and evil. One thing is certain. Geronimo's acts of resistance have earned him immortality. He will forever be remembered as a fearsome warrior, a wily rebel who dared to defy the United States. Few other folk heroes are so emblematic of freedom. Geronimo lived it, breathed it and fought for it. His spirit lives on. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.